If God doesn't exist, then why are we still asking? But what happens when the greatest philosophers in history, from Aristotle to Kant, from Augustine to Kierkegaard, try to answer that question using logic, reason, and deep reflection? In this video, you'll explore 20 ideas that have crossed centuries of thought. Ideas many consider powerful evidence for the existence of God. Forget the cliches. This isn't about blind faith or dogma. It's about philosophy, existence, consciousness, morality, beauty, and even the void. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or just curious, get ready to have your convictions challenged. Because in the end, the real question might not be whether God exists, but whether you're truly ready to face the implications of that answer. Imagine looking at the universe not just as a cluster of matter, but as a grand sequence of events, causes, and effects, as if everything that exists were part of a vast metaphysical domino chain, where each piece falls only because another one pushed it. The classical cosmological argument starts from this simple intuition: nothing happens without a cause. This idea is ancient, yet profoundly powerful. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher from the 4th century BC, observed that everything that moves is moved by something else. Nothing begins on its own. There's always a source, an initial push. Centuries later, in the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest thinkers in the Christian tradition, expanded this reasoning with more clarity and depth, making it one of the central pillars of medieval philosophy and natural theology. The basic structure of the argument is simple but strong. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause is God. But to really understand this argument, we need to examine each step carefully. The first premise, everything that begins to exist has a cause, is a universal rational intuition. Nothing comes from nothing. You've never seen a tree suddenly sprout in your living room without any seed, soil, or reason. Likewise, you don't expect a sound, a light, or an object to just appear out of nowhere. Our constant experience of the world confirms that there's a causal order in things. This principle isn't just empirical, it's rational. Nothing, by definition, can't cause anything. If something exists, it either has always existed or was caused by something outside itself. And this is where we start looking at the universe with new eyes. Did the universe have a beginning? That's the second major claim. The universe began to exist. Here, philosophy and science actually meet. Thomas Aquinas didn't know what we now call the Big Bang, but he already understood that an infinite regress of causes leads to paradoxes. He argued that there cannot be an endless chain of dependent things, because then none of them would have the power to exist on its own. At some point, there must be a beginning, something that doesn't depend on anything else to exist. Centuries later, modern cosmology confirmed that the universe did have a beginning, the famous Big Bang, a single point of space-time origin. That discovery reinforces, from a completely different angle, Thomas's central idea. The universe is not eternal. It had a starting point, and if it had a beginning, it must have a cause. But why must that cause be God? Here, precision is key. This argument doesn't try to prove everything about the God of religion, his goodness, his personal relationship with the world, his revelation, and so on. What it aims to show is the existence of a first cause, something uncaused, something or someone necessary, eternal and unchanging, something that doesn't depend on anything else to exist and that can set the entire chain of causes and effects into motion. For Aristotle, that first cause was what he called the unmoved mover, a being that moves everything without being moved itself, standing outside the ordinary chain of causality. For Thomas Aquinas, that first cause is the necessary being, whose reason for existence lies within itself, whose very essence is existence. That being, uncaused, without beginning, and dependent on nothing, is what we call God. The appeal of this argument isn't just logical, It's deeply existential. It reaches the most fundamental question a human being can ask. Why is there something rather than nothing? The cosmological argument offers a response that's not merely scientific or technical, but philosophical and meaningful. Science can describe how the universe works, how it expands, how matter organizes, how natural laws operate. But philosophy asks the deeper why. Why does any of this exist at all? If we accept that all reality is contingent, meaning it could have failed to exist, then we need something necessary, something that grounds all being. Of course, critics have their objections. Some ask, then who caused God? But that question misses the point. The argument doesn't say that everything has a cause. It says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. If God is eternal and necessary, he never began to exist. Therefore, he doesn't need a cause. Others claim maybe the universe is eternal or caused itself. But self-creation is a contradiction. Something can't exist before it exists in order to cause itself. And the idea of an eternal universe clashes with both current cosmological evidence and the deeper philosophical question of why it exists at all. Why does this matter? The real strength of this argument lies not only in its logic, but in what it awakens in us. If the universe had a beginning, and nothing begins without a cause, then we're not here by accident. There is an origin, a foundation, an intelligence or reality that sustains everything that is. This idea isn't just rational, it's deeply comforting, even transformative. It suggests that reality has order, that the world is intelligible, and that our existence has deeper roots than chance or chaos. As Thomas Aquinas once wrote, human reason can know with certainty that God exists as the first cause and final end of all things. And you? Have you ever stopped to wonder why there is something rather than nothing? Could it be that the universe itself, in its silent vastness, is pointing towards something greater than itself? We live in a world where everything seems to depend on something that came before. You exist because your parents existed. A tree stands because a seed once sprouted. The sound of your voice only happens because the air vibrates. Reality seems built on a chain of causes and effects, one link pulling the next, and that's how the world works. But can that chain go on forever? Can there be an infinite number of causes stretching backward with no true beginning? For Thomas Aquinas, the answer is clear: no. This is where the first cause argument begins, one of the 5 logical paths Aquinas developed to demonstrate the existence of God, presented in his monumental work, Summa Theologica. According to him, if we trace the chain of causes back far enough, we can't stop at contingent events, because each one depends on something else. There must be a starting point, a cause that itself was never caused. That is the first cause, God. Aquinas starts by observing reality, not as an experimental scientist, but as a metaphysician, someone searching for the foundation of being. He notices that everything which exists because of something else doesn't contain the reason for its own existence. Take a building, for example. It doesn't exist on its own. It depends on architects, materials, the laws of physics, and engineers. Those engineers, in turn, exist because of their parents, society, language, biology. Before long, we realize nothing is self-sufficient. Aquinas' central question is simple yet profound. If everything is caused by something else, where did the first push come from? If there's no first cause, how does anything exist right now? Here lies the turning point. Aquinas rejects the idea of an infinite regress of causes, that the chain of causality could stretch backward forever without ever reaching a true beginning. And why? Because if everything depends on something else, and nothing is truly independent, then nothing could exist at all. It would be like a row of dominoes that only fall if the first one is pushed. But if there's no first domino, none of them move. That image helps make his point clear. The reality we experience doesn't hold itself up. It needs a foundation. a being that doesn't need to be caused, a necessary being that exists by its own nature, depending on nothing beyond itself. Who is this first cause? Aquinas isn't talking about just any cause. He argues that the first cause must have specific qualities: eternal, unchanging, necessary, and independent. It can't be something physical, because everything physical changes, is limited, and depends on something else. Therefore, this first cause must be metaphysical, pure existence itself, something that never began to exist and can never cease to exist. For Aquinas, that being is what all religious traditions call God. It is necessary to admit a first cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. Thomas Aquinas. But what if the universe is eternal? That's a classic objection. And interestingly, Aquinas himself admitted, with philosophical humility, that reason alone can't prove the universe had a beginning in time. But his point doesn't depend on that. Even if the universe had always existed, even if the chain of causes had no temporal start, Aquinas argued that it would still need an ontological foundation. In other words, even an eternal chain of dependent things still requires something outside it to sustain it and give it existence. The first cause isn't just the first event in time, it's the first in the order of dependence, the one that gives being to everything else. Later philosophies, like David Hume's empiricism or Sartre's existentialism, tried to weaken this argument. Hume questioned whether every effect really needs a cause. Sartre claimed that being simply is, without needing justification. But these objections raise their own issues. To say that something just is, without explaining why, seems to ignore our deep rational drive for meaning and grounding. The question remains, why is there something rather than nothing? If the universe is contingent, why does it exist, and not simply nothing at all? The first cause argument pushes us to look beyond appearances. We live in a world of dependency, finitude, impermanence. Aquinas invites us to seek what lies behind it all. That which doesn't depend, doesn't change, doesn't begin. Being itself. This argument isn't a mathematical proof of God. It's a rational pathway, one that points toward a reality beyond the physical. It doesn't force belief. It invites contemplation. Perhaps Aquinas' greatest contribution isn't an answer, but the question he leaves us with. Can everything that exists really be explained only by secondary causes? Or do we have to recognize a first, uncaused cause, a final foundation, without which nothing could exist at all? That question is the beating heart of philosophy. It isn't just abstract speculation, it's an existential search. Because if there truly is a first cause, then our existence isn't random or absurd. It has roots, direction, and purpose. There's something deeply mysterious about the simple fact that things move. A body falls, water flows, fire burns, time passes, nothing stays completely still. We live in a universe where everything is in constant motion and transformation. But Aristotle, perhaps the greatest thinker of ancient Greece, saw in this movement a sign of something greater, something eternal, something that sustains all motion without itself moving. And that's where his famous idea comes from, the unmoved mover. For Aristotle, philosophy begins with observing the world. He doesn't start from dogma, but from the most obvious and undeniable fact. Things change. And for him, movement isn't just about physical motion. It includes every kind of change, being born, growing, aging, learning, decaying. Everything material is subject to change. This change, he explains, is the passage from potentiality to actuality. For example, a seed has the potential to become a tree, but it only actually becomes one through a process of growth and transformation. This process requires an external factor. Nothing brings its own potential into actuality by itself. Everything that changes is moved by something else. From there, Aristotle asks the inevitable question: if everything that moves is moved by something else, what moves that mover? And what moved the one before that? And the one before that? We start to imagine a chain of movement, where each thing is moved by another. A rock rolls because someone kicked it, but that person moved because of nerve impulses. Those impulses came from the brain, triggered by a desire, which came from a memory, which came from an earlier experience, and so on. But can this chain go back infinitely? Aristotle says no. An infinite regression of movers, a never-ending chain of causes, would make motion itself impossible. It would be like an endless row of dominoes that never had a first one to fall. If no first domino ever fell, none of the others would move. If there's no first mover, nothing would be moving now. That's why Aristotle concludes that for motion to exist in the world, there must be a first mover, something that was never moved by anything else, something unchanging, yet responsible for the motion of all things. So what exactly is this unmoved mover? It can't be like anything else in the world. It isn't physical, because everything physical changes. It isn't made up of parts, because whatever is composed can fall apart. It has no potential, meaning it can't become anything other than what it already is, because it is pure actuality, complete being, lacking nothing, incapable of change. The unmoved mover moves everything without itself moving, much like an object of desire moves the lover, not by physical force, but by attraction. Aristotle says it moves as the object of love, as the final goal that all things are drawn toward. It's a profound and poetic idea. The entire universe moves because it's drawn toward this first mover, as if everything were reaching toward a reality that is full, perfect, and eternal. In Metaphysics, Book 13, Aristotle identifies this unmoved mover with the idea of God, but not the mythological gods of Greece. This God isn't human-like or emotional. He is pure thought thinking about itself, a being completely actual, eternal, necessary, and perfect. The life that God enjoys is similar to the best life we know, and this life is eternal, because God is eternal. Therefore, God is eternal and perfect life. Aristotle, Metaphysics, Book 13. This God doesn't create the world like a craftsman shaping matter. He doesn't act with tools or with willpower. He simply is. And by being pure existence itself, he becomes the principle that sustains all motion in the universe. Centuries later, Thomas Aquinas took this idea and wove it into Christian theology. For him, Aristotle's unmoved mover was the same as the personal God of the Christian faith, reinterpreted through a broader theological framework. Aquinas identified this being as the creator, the sustainer, the God who moves all things with wisdom and intention. By joining Aristotle's reason with Christian faith, Aquinas didn't reject the argument of the unmoved mover. He embraced it as one of his 5 rational proofs for the existence of God. But this argument isn't just about logic. It's also a meditation on the movement of life itself. Everything about us is in motion. We grow, change, suffer, learn. Yet, if everything changes, what holds it all together? The unmoved mover reminds us that there must be something stable behind everything that moves, a fixed origin within the chaos, a center of fullness that gives meaning to impermanence. Think about it. If everything that changes needs something to move it, what moved everything in the first place? What lies at the origin of motion, time, and being itself? To deny the existence of a first mover is, in a way, to deny the possibility of understanding motion at all. But to accept it is to open both the mind and the heart to the idea that the universe is sustained by something far greater, something perfect, eternal, and alive. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine the most perfect being you can possibly conceive, a being infinite in power, goodness, and wisdom, a being that lacks nothing, supreme in every possible way. Now ask yourself, does this being exist only in your mind, or also in reality? That's the kind of philosophical and spiritual exercise that led Anselm of Canterbury, in the 11th century, to formulate one of the boldest and most influential ideas in the history of philosophy, the ontological argument for the existence of God. Anselm was a monk and theologian, but also a meticulous thinker. In his work, Proslogion, he didn't want to simply repeat doctrines or religious traditions. He wanted to find a rational proof of God's existence, one that didn't depend on observing the physical world or on sensory experience, but that arose directly from pure reason itself. His starting point wasn't the universe, morality, or history. It was the very idea of God. And his proposal is both simple and profound. If we truly understand what we mean by the word God, we will see that God's existence is necessary. In other words, the very definition of God implies his existence. The argument begins with a famous definition: God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. This isn't just any being, or even a very powerful one. It's the greatest conceivable being, absolutely perfect, beyond which nothing greater can be imagined. Anselm argues that even the fool, meaning the atheist, understands this definition when he hears it. He may not believe that God exists, but he understands what is meant by a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. Here lies the heart of the argument. If such a being exists only in the mind, and not in reality, then we could imagine something greater, a being with all the same perfections plus real existence. But if we can imagine something greater than that than which nothing greater can be conceived, then the very definition contradicts itself, which is impossible. Therefore, Anselm concludes, God cannot exist only in the mind, he must also exist in reality. Unlike most arguments for God's existence, the ontological argument doesn't begin with the world, experience, or observation. It's purely a priori, based entirely on reason, independent of any physical evidence. It's a kind of reasoning that feels closer to mathematics or pure logic. Just as we know a triangle has three sides, without ever needing to see one drawn, Anselm believed we could recognize God's existence through reason alone. Of course, such a daring argument sparked immediate criticism. The monk Gornilo, a contemporary of Anselm, wrote a response called In Behalf of the Fool, offering a parody. Imagine the most perfect island you can conceive. By Anselm's logic, it must exist, because a perfect island that exists is greater than one that doesn't. But that proves nothing. It just shows we can imagine things. Anselm's reply was straightforward. The argument applies only to God, because only God is conceived as a necessary being. Islands, no matter how perfect, are contingent. They can exist or not. God, on the other hand, is the one whose non-existence is impossible. Centuries later, philosopher Immanuel Kant offered another famous critique. He argued that existence isn't a perfection or a real attribute. Saying that something exists doesn't add a quality to the concept of the thing itself. Therefore, you can't simply define God as existing and then conclude he exists because of that definition. Kant's objection is deep and influential, but many philosophers still debate whether it truly refutes Anselm's reasoning or only challenges one interpretation of it. Over time, the ontological argument was reworked by many thinkers. René Descartes, for example, developed a similar version, claiming that existence is indeed a perfection, one that cannot be missing from a being that is absolutely perfect. In the 20th century, philosopher Alvin Plantinga presented a modal version of the argument, using the logic of possibility and necessity. In simple terms, he argued, it's possible that a maximally great being exists, one that is all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect. If it's possible, then this being exists in at least one possible world. But if it exists in one possible world and is maximally great, it must exist in all possible worlds, including ours. Plantinga didn't claim this as an undeniable proof, but as a rational defense, showing that belief in God can be both logical and philosophically justified. More than an abstract proof, the ontological argument is an invitation to reflect deeply on what we mean by God. Anselm didn't write as a cold logician, but as a seeker of truth. He begins his proslogion with the words, I do not seek to understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand. That sentence captures the spirit of the argument. Faith seeking understanding, reason rising toward the contemplation of the absolute. If we accept the definition of God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived, then denying his existence implies that we can imagine something greater than the greatest possible being, a logical contradiction. And if pure reason itself points toward the existence of God, then perhaps the divine reality isn't only a matter of faith, but a demand of logic itself. Some ideas don't just explain the world, they shake the very foundations of how we think. René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher, didn't simply want to reflect on God. He wanted to rebuild all of philosophy from indubitable first principles. And at the heart of his rationalist project lies a bold reformulation of the ontological argument, where the very idea of perfection necessarily leads to the conclusion that God exists. Descartes is known as the philosopher of methodical doubt. He questioned everything: the senses, the body, the world, even his own thoughts. But in doubting everything, he discovered one unshakable truth. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. If he could doubt, that meant he was thinking. And if he was thinking, he must exist. From that firm foundation, Descartes began rebuilding knowledge. And one of the first ideas that emerges in the rational mind, he said, is the idea of God, a being absolutely perfect. But Descartes didn't stop at saying, we have the idea of God. He went further. That idea could not have come from ourselves. We are imperfect, limited, and fallible beings. So where would the notion of absolute perfection come from? In his Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes argued that only a perfect being could be the cause of the idea of perfection. In other words, we couldn't have conceived of something greater than ourselves unless that something greater somehow caused that idea within us. The ontological step of his reasoning comes next. Descartes claimed that existence belongs to the very essence of God. That might sound strange at first, so let's break it down. For Descartes, God is by definition the absolutely perfect being. He possesses every possible perfection: omniscience, omnipotence, immutability, infinite goodness, eternity. And among these perfections is existence itself. Yes, for Descartes, to exist is a perfection. Something that doesn't exist, no matter how perfect it may seem in other ways, cannot be absolutely perfect, because it lacks existence. To deny God's existence, therefore, would be like imagining a mountain without a valley, or a triangle without three sides. Existence is inseparable from the essence of God, just as having three angles equal to two right angles is inseparable from the essence of a triangle. René Descartes, Meditations on First Philosophy. Meditation. His reasoning can be summarized like this. I have the idea of a being that is absolutely perfect. Existence is a perfection. Therefore, if an absolutely perfect being did not exist, it would not be absolutely perfect. Therefore, God must necessarily exist. What Descartes is doing here is applying the same rational principles we use to recognize mathematical truths to a metaphysical question. Just as we know a circle has 360 degrees without ever needing to draw one, he believed we can know God exists from the very idea we have of him. Naturally, this argument sparked enormous debate. One of its most famous critics was Immanuel Kant in the 18th century. Kant argued that existence isn't a perfection, because it doesn't add anything to the concept of a thing. Saying something exists doesn't change its internal properties. It only claims that such a concept corresponds to something real. He gave a simple example. You can imagine 1,000,000 gold coins and describe all their qualities, but that doesn't make them real. Existence, therefore, isn't a real predicate, and can't simply be added to the concept of God as if it were another attribute. This criticism became central to modern philosophy. Yet Descartes' argument remains influential, especially among rationalist and theistic thinkers who see in it a bridge between pure reason and metaphysical reality. Regardless of the objections, Descartes' reformulated ontological argument doesn't rely on emotion, mystical experience, or historical evidence. It seeks to establish God's existence as a necessary truth, as self-evident as a mathematical equation. And that's both its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. Strength. Because if the logic holds, the conclusion is inescapable. Vulnerability. Because if any premise is challenged, as Kant did, the entire logical structure collapses. But Descartes didn't present this argument in isolation. He placed it within a broader system, a project to rebuild human knowledge, where God guarantees the reliability of reason, the truth of clear and distinct ideas, and even the existence of the external world. For Descartes, God's existence isn't a hypothesis. It's a requirement of reason itself. God is a being that cannot not exist, a being whose essence implies his existence. This way of thinking might sound foreign to the modern mind, which tends to separate faith and reason. But in Descartes' philosophy, that division doesn't exist. God is the foundation of everything, of logic, science, morality, and consciousness itself. Even if you don't agree with all his premises, the argument challenges us to reflect. Why do we have the idea of perfection? Why can we imagine a being greater than anything we've ever seen or known? Does that point only to a construct of the mind, or to something real? In an age where everything feels relative, Descartes' argument stands as a call for rational consistency, a search for an absolute foundation that doesn't change, doesn't depend, doesn't fail, and that necessarily exists. There's something inside us that reacts when we see injustice, a quiet voice that's disturbed by lies, angered by cruelty, and moved by pure kindness. This voice doesn't come from the outside. It seems to rise from the deepest part of our own conscience. It was from this universal experience that Immanuel Kant, one of the greatest philosophers of the modern era, developed one of his most powerful ideas, the moral argument for the existence of God. For Kant, proving God through metaphysics or cosmology wasn't as important as recognizing morality itself as a real, active force in human life. In his Critique of Practical Reason, 1788, he argued that human beings are moral agents. We act not only based on desires or interests, but guided by a sense of duty. This duty doesn't come from society, religion, or education. For Kant, it's autonomous and rational, built into the very structure of human reason. He called it the universal moral law. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. This is the famous formula of the categorical imperative, which defines morality in terms of universality. In simpler words, don't do anything you wouldn't want everyone else to do, the sense of duty and the search for the highest good. From this moral principle, Kant observed something profound. Human beings don't just want to do good. They also believe there should be a connection between being good and being happy. But in reality, that's not always how life works. Often, good people suffer and bad people prosper. And yet, we still feel that this isn't right, that in the end, justice should prevail, that goodness should be rewarded, and evil should be held accountable. This deep intuition led Kant to develop the concept of the summum bonum, the highest good, a state of existence where virtue and happiness are perfectly aligned. But this raised a critical question. If human reason demands this moral harmony as the ultimate ideal, what guarantees that it's even possible? Kant proposed that this rational demand of morality only makes sense if three conditions, or postulates of practical reason, are true: the freedom of the will, the immortality of the soul, the existence of God. Here, God isn't proven through logical deduction, like in Descartes or Anselm. Instead, Kant claimed that without God, the moral project of human reason would be incomplete. If there were no moral order to the universe, no ultimate standard of justice, then the moral law inside us would lose its ultimate foundation. In other words, the existence of a moral law within us points to the existence of a moral lawgiver above us. This lawgiver doesn't impose morality from the outside, like a divine dictator. Rather, God is the rational condition that makes morality meaningful. He is the metaphysical guarantee that goodness isn't meaningless, that moral striving is not in vain. It's important to understand that Kant didn't offer the moral argument as a proof in the traditional sense. He didn't say, God exists, otherwise morality couldn't. Instead, he suggested that faith in God is a requirement of practical reason. He called this a rational faith, not blind belief, but a trust grounded in the moral necessity of meaning. As he famously wrote, "Two things fill me with ever-increasing wonder and awe, the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me." This line, found at the end of the Critique of Practical Reason, perfectly sums up his view. There's an order in the cosmos, and there's an order in the conscience, and both point towards something greater than ourselves. And if God doesn't exist? That question, of course, haunted many thinkers after Kant. If there is no God, no supreme moral lawgiver, is our moral sense just a biological adaptation, a social invention? Friedrich Nietzsche, for instance, argued that with the death of God, the world lost its foundation for objective morality. Without a higher authority, the modern individual would have to create their own values, but at the cost of a deep existential void. Kant disagreed. For him, the very structure of human reason demands a moral foundation beyond the self. The issue isn't just about whether God exists. It's about whether goodness itself has meaning. Without God, morality might still function socially, but it would lose its weight as a universal and rational necessity. The God of Kant's moral argument isn't necessarily the God of organized religion, with its rituals and dogmas. He is an ethical God, a rational foundation for universal morality. He doesn't speak for any tradition, but for reason itself, and that's what makes this argument so powerful. It doesn't rely on faith or mystical experience. It begins with something every human being feels, the call of moral duty, and asks, why does this make sense? Why should we do what's right, even when no one is watching? Why do we seek justice, even when it doesn't come? Kant's answer is clear, because reason demands the existence of a just God, not as a comfort, but as a guarantee of meaning. The greatness of the moral argument lies in showing that morality isn't a burden, it's a path. A path that points to a greater purpose in life, to the hope that goodness isn't just a personal choice, but part of a deeper cosmic order. And that path, though rational, leads us closer to spirituality, because it invites us to trust that behind our inner struggle to do good, there exists an eternal and just foundation, a God who is, above all, the source of morality itself. You're walking through a field. The ground is uneven, scattered with stones and roots. Then suddenly, you notice something metallic, a small object with perfectly fitted gears, hands that move in harmony, and a dial that marks time with precision. It's a watch. Now imagine this. Would you believe that the watch came into being by pure chance, shaped by the wind, erosion, and time? Or would you instantly conclude that someone made it, that behind it lies an intelligent mind, a watchmaker? This is the metaphor that gave birth to one of the most famous arguments in the philosophy of religion, the teleological argument, also known as the argument from design, presented with remarkable clarity by William Paley in the early 19th century. Paley wrote his most influential work, Natural Theology, 1802, at a time when science was advancing rapidly. But instead of seeing science and faith as enemies, he saw harmony between them. For Paley, the very order revealed by science was evidence of purpose, of design, and therefore of a creator. The argument begins with a simple yet powerful observation. The universe shows astonishing functional complexity. From the orbit of planets to the structure of living systems, everything seems finely tuned and precisely arranged. According to Paley, such complexity can't be explained by random causes alone. Just as a watch needs a watchmaker, The universe needs a designer, and that designer, Paley argued, is God. The word teleological comes from the Greek telos, meaning end, goal, or purpose. The idea is that many parts of the universe seem to work as if they were made for a specific purpose. Take the human eye, for example. It isn't just complex, it's purposefully designed to capture light, focus, and interpret the visual world. The laws of physics, too, aren't chaotic. They're mathematical, predictable, and stable. For Paley, this kind of organization can't be a product of blind chance. The very presence of purpose in nature points to an intelligent mind behind creation. The marks of design are as clear in the works of nature as in a watch, and just as the watch leads us to a watchmaker, the universe leads us to God. William Paley, Natural Theology. The argument from design isn't only logical, it's deeply intuitive and emotionally powerful. Even people who've never studied philosophy have felt it, that sense that there must be something greater behind the order of the world. A sunset, the birth of a child, the symmetry of a flower, all seem to whisper, "This can't be an accident." Paley understood this well. His argument appeals not only to reason, but to our shared sense of wonder. He invites us to see the world as an open book, one in which every detail bears the signature of its creator. But just a few years after Paley's book was published, a new theory challenged this way of seeing things. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Darwin himself was once deeply moved by Paley's reasoning, yet his theory offered a different explanation for biological complexity, one based on a gradual natural process that didn't require an intelligent designer. From that point on, many philosophers and scientists viewed natural selection as a fatal blow to the design argument, at least in its biological form. After all, if complex organisms can arise through random variation and adaptive selection, why invoke a creator? Still, the teleological argument didn't disappear. It evolved. Many modern thinkers shifted its focus away from biology to physics, specifically to the idea of the fine-tuning of the universe. The fundamental constants of physics, like gravity, the electromagnetic force, or the cosmological constant, are finely adjusted to an almost unimaginable precision. Even slight changes in their values would make life, or even matter itself, impossible. This raises a striking question. How is it that the universe seems calibrated to allow conscious life? Some turn to the multiverse theory as an answer. Perhaps there are countless universes, and we just happen to live in the one that worked. But so far, that idea is purely speculative, unobservable and unfalsifiable. Others see fine-tuning as modern confirmation of Paley's insight. There's intelligence behind the cosmos. The teleological argument has special strength because it bridges reason and intuition. It doesn't require technical expertise or blind faith. It begins with a simple experience, the order and beauty of the world, and asks, if we recognize design in something as small as a machine, why wouldn't we recognize design in something as vast and intricate as the universe itself? Paley's invitation is not just to argue, but to see, to look at nature not as a lifeless accident, but as a living work of art. At its core, the argument from design isn't only about the origin of the universe, it's about our own purpose. If there is design, then we are not cosmic accidents. We are part of an intention, a plan, a larger story, and that changes everything, the way we see life, death, morality, and love. It changes how we see ourselves. Because if there is a designer, then we exist for a reason. Everything around us carries a silent but powerful truth. Nothing has to exist. We don't have to be here. The trees, the stars, the cities, our thoughts. None of it is necessary. It all could have not existed, and yet, here we are. That's the starting point of one of the deepest and most existential arguments in medieval philosophy. The argument from contingency, formulated by Thomas Aquinas. It doesn't just ask how things came into being. It dares to ask, why is there something rather than nothing? In his monumental work, Summa Theologica, Aquinas presents 5 ways to rationally demonstrate the existence of God. The third of these is the argument from contingency, and it begins with a simple observation. Some things exist, but they don't have to. A contingent being is something that doesn't contain within itself the reason for its own existence. You, for instance, are not necessary. You might never have been born. You could simply not exist. The same is true for mountains, animals, planets, and galaxies. They all exist, but none of them had to. These things come into being, change, and eventually disappear. They are limited, finite, and dependent. And if everything that exists were like that, if everything were contingent, then at some point, there must have been nothing at all. But if there was ever a time when nothing existed, then nothing could have ever come into existence. Because, as the old philosophical saying goes, ex nihilo nihil fit, from nothing, nothing comes. Absolute nothingness cannot produce being. And here lies the crucial point. If something exists now, then there has never been absolute nothingness. Something must have always existed, and that something cannot be contingent because contingent beings don't exist by themselves. Therefore, there must exist a necessary being, one that cannot not exist, that exists by its own nature, and that gives existence and support to everything else. That necessary being, according to Aquinas, is God. Looking beyond immediate causes, the argument from contingency forces us to think beyond simple chains of cause and effect. Imagine a line of people passing a bucket of water. Each person only has the bucket because someone handed it to them. If we ask where the bucket came from, it's not enough to say it's being passed along. Someone must have had it first. In the same way, contingent beings may explain each other within a chain, but the entire chain still needs an explanation outside itself. A foundation. Something that gives being to everything else and doesn't depend on anything beyond itself. That foundation must be a necessary, eternal, unchanging, and independent being. One whose very essence is existence. And for Aquinas, that's exactly what we mean when we say God. Contingency isn't just logical, it's existential. This argument isn't only philosophical, it's deeply personal. It confronts us with one of the most haunting questions. Why do I exist? If we are contingent, if we didn't have to be here, then our existence isn't guaranteed or automatic. We are finite, temporary, fragile. And yet, we exist. Why? The Thomistic answer is clear. Because a necessary being, dependent on nothing else, sustains everything in existence. God didn't just create the world once, He continuously holds it in being. If God were to stop thinking of us, we would cease to exist. It's a vision that's both rational and spiritual. God as the constant foundation of existence, the pure act, actus purus, that gives being to all contingent things. What if the universe is eternal? Someone might ask, what if the universe has always existed? What if there was no beginning? Even if the universe were eternal, and Aquinas admitted that this was logically possible, it still wouldn't escape contingency. An eternal universe could still be dependent. It could have been different. It could have not existed at all. Aquinas' point isn't about time. It's about being itself. Even if the universe has always existed, it still doesn't explain why it exists. It still needs something necessary to ground its existence. The difference between contingent and necessary. This distinction is essential. Contingent being exists but could fail to exist, depends on external causes. Necessary being depends on nothing, exists by its own nature, is the source of all being. In Thomistic philosophy, God is the only truly necessary being. He doesn't have existence. He is existence itself, ipsum esse subsistens. Everything else merely participates in being. God is being. This elevates the argument from contingency from a cosmological question to a metaphysical reflection, not just about how the universe began, but about the very nature of existence. The argument may sound abstract, but it touches something deeply human. It reminds us that we aren't self-sufficient, that our very existence points beyond ourselves. The simple fact that we are connects us to the necessary being that sustains all things, and it teaches humility, because if everything depends on something else, then nothing is absolute, except God. As contingent beings, we are fragile, but we are also sustained, wanted, and held by the source of all being itself. There are moments when words fail. You listen to a piece of music that touches something deep inside you. You look at a landscape that feels larger than the world. You read a poem, watch a movie, or witness a pure act of love that brings tears to your eyes, and you can't even explain why. These moments are hard to describe. They're not just beautiful, they're transcendent. It's as if, for a brief instant, the veil of ordinary reality lifts and something greater, something sacred, shines through. This is where the argument from beauty begins. The idea that the very existence of beauty, especially the kind that moves us, stirs us, or transports us, points to something beyond the physical world. It points to a divine source of beauty. Beauty, just appearance, or revelation. Throughout history, many have tried to explain beauty away as a product of biology, taste, or culture. But beauty resists reduction. It doesn't fit neatly into any utilitarian explanation. In the Symposium, Plato takes us on a philosophical ascent, from physical beauty to beauty itself. He argues that when we love a beautiful person or admire a beautiful work of art, what we're really longing for is something beyond that specific form. We're reaching for beauty itself, eternal and perfect. Beauty is the splendor of truth. Plato, the Symposium, later echoed by Plotinus. For Plato, beauty in this world is a reflection, a ray of light from another realm, the world of forms, where absolute beauty exists. That's why, when we encounter something truly beautiful, we feel as though we've touched eternity, even for a second. This isn't about personal taste or preference. The argument from beauty doesn't rely on subjective opinion. It's grounded in aesthetic experiences that overwhelm us, that make us feel small, and at the same time, part of something infinite. It's the shiver you feel listening to a Beethoven symphony, the quiet awe before Michelangelo's Pietà, the peace that settles over you as you look up at a starry sky or watch the endless ocean. These experiences can't be fully put into words, yet they're undeniably real. And for many thinkers, that very reality points to a metaphysical foundation behind beauty itself. If the universe were only blind matter, random evolution, and chaos without purpose, where would such transcendental experiences come from? Why would we respond so powerfully to something that serves no practical or survival function? Dostoevsky, beauty will save the world. This line became one of the great mysteries of Western literature. In The Idiot, Fyodor Dostoevsky's character Prince Mishkin utters it almost like a prophecy. Beauty will save the world. But what did he mean? For Dostoevsky, true beauty isn't just found in art. It shines in goodness, sacrifice, and unconditional love. He saw beauty as an expression of the divine that breaks through the corruption of the world and points toward redemption, a force that is not merely aesthetic, but deeply spiritual. This idea echoes Eastern Christian theology, where an icon isn't just a pretty image, but a window into the sacred. True beauty, in this view, is revelation, an epiphany, a sign that God is present. The argument from beauty isn't meant to be a proof of God in a scientific sense. It doesn't try to demonstrate God's existence like a theorem. Instead, it's a philosophical and existential clue, a hint that if such deep harmony and order exist in the world, maybe they aren't accidents. Maybe beauty is a trace of the divine. C.S. Lewis, who came to faith through beauty before reason, wrote, "I didn't believe in God, but I longed for something beyond time and space, something beautiful. I discovered that my longing was for a source of beauty that the world could not satisfy. That longing led me to God." But what if beauty is only subjective? That's a common objection. And yes, there are cultural and personal differences in taste, but the argument from beauty doesn't rely on relative beauty. It's about the kind of beauty that commands attention. You may not like abstract art, but it's hard to deny the beauty of the Milky Way, a Bach choir, or a story that moves the human soul. Some experiences transcend personal preference and reveal an objective sense of order, harmony, and completeness. Even subjective taste points toward an ideal. When we say, "This is beautiful," we're not just saying, "I like this." We're saying, "This deserves to be admired." We're appealing to something higher, something universal. As Plato said, beauty is the most tangible of the transcendentals. Among the good, the true, and the beautiful, it's beauty that reaches us first, before logic or morality. It seduces the soul. It awakens a nostalgia for a home we've never seen, but somehow remember. That feeling, that beauty calls to us, that it points beyond itself, is what makes this argument so profound. Perhaps beauty is the silent language of God. Imagine walking down an empty street at night. Suddenly you hear a scream. Without thinking much, you run to help. No one is forcing you. You could ignore it and keep walking. But there's something inside you, a quiet voice, that says, "You must do what's right." That voice, the one that calls you to courage, justice, and goodness, even when it's difficult, is what we call the moral conscience. It was by reflecting on this inner voice that C.S. Lewis, the British writer and philosopher, developed one of the most striking arguments for God in modern theology, the argument from conscience. In his book Mere Christianity, Lewis begins with a simple observation. Across all cultures and throughout all of history, people know there's such a thing as right and wrong. And more importantly, they feel they ought to follow what's right. This isn't about personal taste or social rules. It's something deeper. Lewis noticed that when we argue with others, we say things like, "That's not fair. You shouldn't have done that. That was wrong." These phrases only make sense if we believe there's a moral standard above us, one we didn't invent, but discovered. Lewis argues that if morality were purely cultural, it would vary completely from one society to another. But it doesn't. Cultures disagree on details, yes, but there are certain universal principles. Protect the innocent. Help the weak. Don't kill for pleasure. Keep your promises. These principles aren't imposed by laws. They come from within, from what we call the moral law or conscience. And here lies the core of the argument. If there is a universal moral law, there must be a moral mind that established it, the source of the law. Matter or mind? Here's the central question. If the universe is nothing more than blind matter, with no intention or purpose, how do we explain the existence of a moral law that calls us to do good, even when it goes against our own interests? Matter isn't moral. Molecules don't have ethics. The brain can respond to stimuli, but it doesn't judge right and wrong. Yet we do. We feel that we should do certain things, even when we don't. Lewis concluded that conscience could not have arisen from mere matter. It points to something beyond nature, to a supreme mind, a moral source that isn't the product of chance, but the foundation of right and wrong. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. Before becoming a Christian, Lewis was an atheist. He believed the universe was just the result of random, purposeless forces, but something deeply troubled him, his own outrage at the world's injustice. If the universe had no meaning, why did he feel so strongly that it should be fair? Where did that hunger for justice, goodness, and truth come from? My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. If there were no God, morality itself would collapse. Concepts like good and evil, right and wrong, would be nothing more than personal preferences, without any real authority. But if those concepts carry objective weight, then there must be something, or someone, beyond the material world grounding them. A moral law that judges us. The argument from conscience isn't just logical, it's existential. It confronts us personally, because this moral law within us doesn't only guide us, it also judges us. We know we don't live up to the good we recognize, and that creates a spiritual dilemma. If there is a moral law and we break it, then there must also be a moral lawgiver to whom we are accountable. That's the point that led Lewis, and many others, to faith. God, then, is not just an abstract theory. He is the origin and destination of our conscience, the starting point of ethics, and the promise of ultimate justice. The evolutionary objection. Of course, not everyone accepts this argument. Some philosophers and scientists claim morality evolved naturally, as a social instinct that promotes cooperation and survival. But Lewis responded that this doesn't explain the sense of duty, especially when it conflicts with those same instincts. For example, why would someone risk their life to save a stranger, going against their natural instinct for self-preservation? Conscience isn't an instinct, it's what judges between instincts. It says, help that man, even when everything in you screams, run. The voice that comes from above. Lewis's conclusion is simple but powerful. That voice inside us, the one that tells us what's right, can't come from something smaller than us. It must come from something greater. Conscience is the echo of a greater mind, a silent signature of the divine within the human, a constant reminder that there is something, or someone, calling us to be more than what we are. Most religious and philosophical traditions describe God as a personal, transcendent being, someone who created the world out of nothing and rules over it from outside, like an artist shaping his work. But Baruch Spinoza, a 17th century philosopher, offered a radically different vision. For him, God isn't outside the world. God is the world, understood in a rational, necessary, and infinite way. Whatever is in God, and nothing can exist or be conceived without God. De Spinoza, Ethics, Part 1. This single line sums up one of the most profound and controversial ideas in the history of philosophy. God is the very substance of being, the total reality, the infinite essence expressed through everything that exists. We aren't separate from God. We exist in God. God as the substance of all things. Spinoza's philosophy begins with the concept of substance, that which exists by itself and is the cause of itself. Unlike finite beings, which are dependent and limited, true substance must be eternal, unchanging, and infinite. And according to Spinoza, only one substance fits that description: God. But here, God isn't an anthropomorphic being. He has no will, no emotions, no desires. He doesn't choose to create the world. He is the world. Or more precisely, everything that exists is a mode or expression of God. For Spinoza, saying that God is reality isn't poetic language. It's a literal, ontological claim. The universe wasn't created by God as something separate. The universe is the expression of God himself. Pantheism, or something beyond. This view is often labeled pantheism, the belief that God is everything. But Spinoza goes even further. Some describe his idea as rationalist panentheism. God is not only everything that exists, but also everything that can exist, everything that can be conceived. God is the totality of being, all existence and all possibility. Reality, then, isn't random or contingent. It's necessary. The world couldn't have been otherwise. Everything unfolds from the laws of nature, which for Spinoza are the same as the laws of God. Divine freedom, therefore, doesn't mean choosing between possibilities. It means being the cause of oneself and of everything else, according to the logical necessity of reason. A radical vision of the divine. This idea completely transforms our relationship with God. For Spinoza, God is not a person. God has no emotions. God doesn't hear prayers or perform miracles. God doesn't judge, punish, or reward. For these reasons, many of Spinoza's contemporaries accused him of atheism, even though his philosophy is deeply spiritual. He didn't deny God, he affirmed God in the most absolute sense. But this God isn't made in the image of man, rather, man is part of the divine reality. In his masterpiece Ethics, Spinoza writes in the style of geometry, with definitions, axioms, and propositions, as if laying out a mathematical proof of existence. His goal was to show that reason, not faith, can lead us to the knowledge of God. To know God, for Spinoza, is to know reality as it truly is, without illusion, superstition, or uncontrolled passion. And this is why reason is central to his thought. The more we understand the world through reason, the more we unite with the divine essence, and the freer we become. Union with God doesn't happen after death as a reward. It happens here and now, through understanding and virtuous living. For Spinoza, salvation is inner liberation through reason. God acts by necessity, not by choice. Another core idea in Spinoza's philosophy is that God acts not by will, but by the necessity of his own nature. Everything that exists flows from the divine essence with the same certainty that a theorem follows from its axioms. In other words, God didn't decide to create the world. The world exists because God is, and everything that exists flows necessarily from his essence. This replaces the traditional idea of divine free will. For Spinoza, everything in the universe is determined by eternal laws, the expression of God's own rational nature. Ethics as the path to freedom. Spinoza's great work is called Ethics, and that's no coincidence. For him, to live well is to live according to reason, and to live according to reason is to live in harmony with nature, that is, with God. A virtuous life isn't driven by fear or hope for reward, but by understanding. When we realize we're part of a larger, rational whole, that everything happens through an ordered necessity, we stop resisting reality, and in that acceptance, we find peace. The free man, that is, the one who lives according to the dictates of reason, is not led by fear of death, but desires the good directly. Spinoza, Ethics, Part 4. The idea that everything is necessary might sound fatalistic, but for Spinoza, it's the opposite. Understanding the necessity of things frees us from illusion and uncontrolled emotion. Freedom isn't doing whatever we want without cause, it's acting according to reason and our true nature. When we do that, we're not just more rational, we're more divine. Spinoza's philosophy is demanding. It asks us to let go of the image of a personal, emotional, father figure God, and embrace a vision of the divine that is impersonal, yet deeply rational and spiritual. It invites us to see God not as someone else, but as the totality of which we are a part. To deny God, in Spinoza's view, would be to deny reality itself, to deny what is. Inside every human being, there's a thirst that never goes away, a silent, deep, and constant longing for something more. You can call it a hunger for eternity, an existential emptiness, or restlessness of the soul. Whatever name you choose, we all know what it feels like. It's that strange feeling that shows up even in our happiest moments, the sense that our joy is never complete, never enough. This longing for something the world can't provide lies at the heart of the argument from desire, developed by C.S. Lewis and deeply rooted in the thought of St. Augustine. The idea is simple but powerful. Every natural human desire corresponds to something real that can satisfy it. Yet we have desires that nothing in this world can satisfy. Therefore, there must be something beyond this world that can fulfill them. God, the desire. Nothing on earth can satisfy. Let's start with a simple distinction. Some desires clearly have real, accessible objects. We feel hunger, and there's food. We feel thirst, and there's water. We crave companionship, and there are other people. Each of these desires points to something that exists, something that can, at least partially, fulfill it. But C.S. Lewis noticed another kind of longing, one harder to name. A yearning for fullness, for perfect beauty, for eternal meaning, for a joy that doesn't fade. It feels like remembering something we've never lived, a homesickness for a place we've never seen. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. That's the core of the argument. Within us lies a desire that transcends everything this world can offer. That longing isn't a flaw, it's a sign. Centuries before Lewis, St. Augustine expressed the same insight in one of the most famous lines ever written. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. Augustine had chased the pleasures of the world, fame, success, sensuality, power. But none of them quenched the thirst burning inside him. Only when he encountered God did his heart finally find rest. For Augustine, the deepest human desire is evidence of the Creator, not a defect to be cured, but an inner compass pointing us toward the divine. A universal experience. Unlike logical or metaphysical proofs, the argument from desire doesn't begin with reasoning. It begins with experience. It starts with the simple truth that, no matter what the world gives us, pleasure, success, distraction, something always feels missing. You've felt it too. You reach a dream, and for a moment it feels wonderful. But soon, the feeling fades. You take that long-awaited trip, and it's beautiful. But the wonder dissolves when you return home. Even life's most breathtaking moments seem to carry a strange kind of nostalgia, as if whispering, "This isn't everything." That desire points to a higher good, deeper, greater, more enduring. For Lewis and Augustine, that good can only be God, the ultimate object of all our scattered desires, the longing as evidence of the divine. This isn't meant to be a strict logical proof, like Descartes or Aquinas might give. It's an existential argument, one that makes sense of our inner experience. Lewis said that our deepest desires are like a trail of breadcrumbs left by God in the human soul. They don't force belief, they invite pursuit. The thirst itself isn't the water, but it points to the fact that water exists. Some critics claim this longing is just an illusion, a psychological projection, a byproduct of imagination or culture. But Lewis countered with a simple analogy. Children feel hunger not because they imagine food into existence, but because food actually exists. If we feel a hunger that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most reasonable conclusion is that something beyond this world must exist to satisfy it. This longing isn't something we can invent or control. It comes uninvited, often when we least expect it. That suggests it's rooted in something deeper than personal preference, perhaps in the very structure of what it means to be human. The restlessness that points home. Ultimately, the argument from desire proposes that our deepest longings are revelations, signals that the world, for all its beauty, is not our final home. The beauty of this world is like light reflected on water, dazzling, but fleeting and incomplete. God is the source of all the beauty, goodness, and truth we experience in passing things. That's why nothing in this world can satisfy us completely. As Lewis once wrote, the most ordinary things that delight us are only echoes of something that is not of this world. So maybe the emptiness we feel isn't a flaw to escape or numb with distractions. Maybe it's something sacred, a calling? What if that emptiness isn't a problem? What if it's the signature of God on the human soul? Maybe, deep down, what we truly long for isn't happiness itself, but the presence of God. Not everyone believes in God, but almost every human culture, ancient or modern, reports experiences of the sacred. From Christian mystics to indigenous shamans, from Buddhist monks to rural farmers, humanity has always shown an ability to sense something beyond the visible, something that transcends the physical world and touches the deepest part of the soul. These experiences are as diverse as the people who have them, yet they share something in common: the feeling of encountering the transcendent. And it's from this universal phenomenon that the argument from religious experience arises, defended by thinkers like William James and Rudolf Otto. The core idea is simple but profound. If millions of people throughout history report similar experiences of contact with a spiritual reality, it's reasonable to consider that this reality may in fact exist. William James. The fruits of experience. William James, the 19th century American philosopher and psychologist, explored this in his classic work, The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902. He collected and analyzed testimonies from people who claimed to have had deep spiritual experiences. What he found was striking. Across every culture and religion, people described sensations of unity with all things, awareness of a divine presence, moments of ecstasy, inner healing, and moral transformation, often sudden and lasting. For James, these experiences couldn't be dismissed as hallucinations or psychological disorders. They were, instead, legitimate data of human experience, worthy of serious philosophical attention. What is a religious experience? Not every religious experience is dramatic. Many are quiet, subtle, and internal. It could be a sudden feeling of peace during prayer, a sense of loving presence in the middle of deep pain, or an unshakable certainty that there's something more. For James, the main test of a genuine religious experience is its fruits, its results. Real spiritual experiences change people. They leave lasting marks: more peace, more love, more compassion, more depth of life. It's as if the person touches a source of meaning that doesn't come from within themselves. The genuine religious experience is that which produces lasting spiritual fruits: more compassion, more humility, more love. And William James. Because of that, James argued we shouldn't ignore these experiences, but treat them as possible signs of a reality that transcends the physical world. Rudolf Otto. The sacred as a fascinating mystery. While James focused on the effects of religious experience, Rudolf Otto, a German theologian and philosopher from the early 20th century, tried to describe what it feels like. In his book, The Idea of the Holy, 1917, Otto introduced a now famous phrase, mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a mystery that both terrifies and fascinates. According to Otto, the experience of the sacred blends unique emotions: a reverent awe before something vast, powerful, and beyond comprehension; an irresistible fascination, as if that reality were calling us closer; a feeling of smallness, and yet, at the same time, of intimacy with the infinite. The sacred is wholly other. It is a reality that surpasses us, yet surrounds and transforms us. Rudolf Otto, The Idea of the Holy for Otto. This response to the sacred isn't something created by culture or religion. It's a fundamental part of human consciousness, a spontaneous reaction to something real and beyond us. A universal human phenomenon. If only one person had ever claimed to experience the divine, we could dismiss it as illusion or imagination. But when millions of people across centuries and cultures describe similar encounters, we have to at least consider the possibility that there's a common reality behind them. That's one of the strengths of the argument. It's not about one particular religion or doctrine. It's about a universal human experience. Religions may differ in beliefs and symbols, But they converge on one point: the conviction that there is an other, a being, an energy, a presence that can be experienced. And for those who experience it, it often feels more real than physical reality itself. The critiques and the counterpoint. Of course, the argument from religious experience has its critics. Some claim these experiences can be explained by neurological activity, altered states of consciousness, or cultural conditioning. But there's an important distinction between describing the mechanism of an experience and explaining its ultimate source. The fact that the brain participates in religious experience doesn't prove it's an illusion, any more than the brain's role in vision proves the visible world isn't real. Moreover, the effects of these experiences are often profound and lasting. People change their lives, overcome addictions, forgive enemies, and dedicate themselves to compassion or service. Is it really reasonable to say that all such transformations come only from illusion? A window to the divine. The argument from religious experience doesn't try to force belief. It doesn't say everyone must believe in God. Instead, it challenges radical skepticism. It suggests that if so many sincere, transformative, and life-changing accounts of encounters with the transcendent exist, maybe something real stands behind them. Perhaps the sacred is a dimension of reality that can't be captured by the senses, but can be felt and lived within. These experiences might be like windows into the divine, moments when eternity touches time and the invisible reveals itself to the human heart. And if even one of those experiences is genuine, if even one person has truly encountered the sacred, then God exists, and that God isn't confined to temples, books, or institutions, but reveals himself directly to the human soul, in silence, in love, and in presence. Why does the universe operate with such order? Why do stars move in predictable paths? Electrons follow constant rules, and even light behaves with precision, as if responding to invisible commands. Behind everything that exists, there seem to be laws, formulas, patterns, mathematical symmetries that govern how reality works. From the motion of galaxies to the beating of the human heart, everything appears to follow a set of logical, intelligible, and incredibly stable principles. This observation leads us to a fundamental question. Where do these laws come from? That's where the argument from the existence of natural laws comes in. The idea that the universe's intelligibility and its consistent mathematical order suggest the presence of a rational mind behind nature, a cosmic intelligence that many call God. A universe governed by order. The universe isn't random chaos, it's structured. Scientists can predict eclipses down to the second. Mathematical formulas describe the behavior of invisible particles with astonishing accuracy. There's regularity, symmetry, and logic on every scale, from the microscopic to the cosmic. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest physicists in history, never hid his amazement at this order. For him, the greatest gift of science wasn't technology, but the realization that nature is understandable through human reason. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Albert Einstein. Einstein wasn't religious in the traditional sense, but he felt deep reverence for the rational structure of the cosmos. He called it Spinoza's God, an intelligence that reveals itself in the laws of nature, not as a person, but as pure logical beauty and order. Paul Davies and the Rational Universe. More recently, physicist and philosopher Paul Davies expanded on this line of thought. In books like The Mind of God and The Eerie Silence, Davies raises questions that even the most skeptical scientists find hard to ignore. Why does the universe have laws at all? Why are those laws mathematically elegant? And why do they apply universally, everywhere and always? According to Davies, the existence of orderly natural laws isn't something science can explain on its own. Science uses these laws, but it can't explain why they exist, or why they take the form they do. This leads to a philosophical hypothesis. These laws aren't random accidents. They point to an underlying rational structure, something that resembles a mind, the miracle of mathematics. Another fascinating point is the effectiveness of mathematics itself. Why should an abstract invention of the human mind describe the workings of the universe so perfectly? Physicist Eugene Wigner called this the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. In other words, it's astonishing, almost miraculous, that equations we create can match the patterns of the cosmos so precisely. This suggests that mathematics isn't just a convenient tool. It seems to be woven into the fabric of reality. As if the universe were written in a language that existed long before us, a rational, pre-existing code that we can access, but did not invent. And that raises a deeper question. Who wrote this language? The ancient idea of the logos. The Greek word logos means both reason and word. In the opening of the Gospel of John, we read, "In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God." This concept of divine reason structuring the cosmos is far older than modern science. Philosophers like Heraclitus, the Stoics, and later Christian theologians saw the universe as an expression of an ordering mind, a rational principle giving meaning and unity to all things. The argument from natural laws revives this ancient idea in a modern context. If the universe is governed by rational and elegant laws, its origin is more likely to be the result of intention, not blind chance or design. One of the main assumptions of atheistic naturalism is that these laws simply exist. They're brute facts. There's no reason for them. They just are. But that answer, while possible, feels philosophically hollow, like accepting a book without an author or a symphony without a composer. The laws are coherent, functional, and complex, yet we're told no one wrote them. For Paul Davies, that explanation falls short. He argues it makes more sense to believe that the universe has laws because it was designed to be understood. That implies a rational mind, an intention. The universe seems to have been designed in a way that allows conscious life to emerge and understand it. Paul Davies, science and faith as partners. It's important to note that this argument doesn't reject science. In fact, it starts from science's success and asks what deeper foundation makes that success possible. The existence of natural laws doesn't prove God mathematically, but it powerfully points toward the existence of a supreme mind that upholds the universe's order. Science describes how things work. Philosophy asks why, and it's within that why that faith and reason can meet. A rational symphony. Ultimately, the argument from natural laws invites us to see the universe not as meaningless noise, but as a rational symphony, a melody that can be understood precisely because it was composed by a mind that wanted to be understood. If that's true, then science, philosophy, and spirituality aren't enemies, but complementary paths leading toward the same source, an eternal logos, an infinite mind, a wellspring of reason and order, the reality we call God. Where did the universe come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? These are questions as old as philosophy itself and as modern as today's cosmology. For some, these questions belong to science, for others, to religion. But there's a point where both meet, in the search for the first cause of the cosmos. That's where the Kalam cosmological argument comes in, a modern version of the ancient cosmological argument, updated through contemporary physics and philosophical reasoning. It gained renewed attention in recent decades, thanks to thinkers like William Lane Craig, who brought it back into both academic and public debate. The structure of the argument is simple, direct, and profound. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. This reasoning seems brief, but it leads to surprising conclusions, including the existence of a timeless, immaterial, and powerful creator, what many would call God. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. This first premise seems obvious. In our daily experience, nothing simply pops into existence without a cause. You've never seen a house appear out of nowhere, or a sound happen without something producing it. Human reason works on the basis of causality. Even quantum mechanics, often used to question this, doesn't actually show the absence of cause, but rather probabilistic behavior within an already existing physical system. In other words, even the random happens in a causal context. The point is clear. If something began to exist, it couldn't have come from nothing, and nothing, by definition, has no power to cause anything. 2. The universe began to exist. Here's where science steps in. For centuries, many believed the universe was eternal, with no beginning and no end. But in the 20th century, that view changed completely. The Big Bang Theory, now widely accepted, shows that the universe had a definite beginning about 13.8 billion years ago. At that moment, not only did matter and energy come into being, but space and time themselves. That means the universe is not eternal. It had a starting point, not an explosion in space, but the expansion of space-time itself from an initial singularity. Time had a beginning. If the universe expanded from a singularity, there is nothing before the Big Bang. Stephen Hawking. Other discoveries confirm this. The second law of thermodynamics shows that usable energy is gradually running down, something that only makes sense if the universe had a beginning. Edwin Hubble's discovery of the universe's expansion implies that, if we trace it backward, everything was once concentrated in a single point of infinite density. So both physics and philosophy point in the same direction. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. If everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, then the universe must have a cause. But this cause can't be part of the universe itself. It can't exist within space or time, or be made of matter or energy, because all those things began with the universe. Therefore, the cause of the universe must be timeless, existing beyond time, immaterial, not made of matter or energy, powerful, capable of bringing all of physical reality into being, necessary, existing by its own nature, not dependent on anything else, personal, able to choose to create, not an impersonal, automatic force. That last point, being personal, is essential. A timeless, eternal cause could only bring about a temporal effect, like the universe, if there was a free decision involved. Otherwise, the effect would be eternal too. This suggests that the cause of the universe is a mind, not a mechanism, an eternal and powerful mind which many identify as God. The deeper meaning. Though it sounds technical, this argument carries deep existential weight. If the universe was caused, then we are not the product of blind chance. Our existence comes from an intelligence that transcends space and time. And if this cause is personal, that means there was intention behind creation. That completely changes how we see reality, not as a meaningless cosmic accident, but as the result of a conscious decision. If God does not exist, the universe has no cause. If the universe has no cause, it has no reason to exist. But it exists. Therefore, God is the reason for its existence. Sir William Lane Craig. Common objections critics often ask, but who caused God? That question misunderstands the argument. The claim isn't that everything has a cause, only that everything that begins to exist has one. God, as the first cause, didn't begin to exist. He is eternal and necessary, uncaused. Others suggest that the universe could have come about spontaneously, from quantum fluctuations. But even quantum fluctuations require a pre-existing quantum field, which means we're still not talking about nothing. A philosophical miracle. In the end, the argument from the origin of the universe isn't just a logical exercise. It's an invitation to look at existence with wonder. The fact that something exists rather than nothing is itself a philosophical miracle. And if there truly is an eternal mind behind it all, then we are not alone. We're living inside a story, A story that had a beginning, a cause, and maybe a purpose. Imagine walking into a control room filled with dials and switches, dozens of them, each set to a very specific position. You realize that if even one of those dials were turned slightly, just a fraction higher or lower, life of any kind would be impossible. The obvious question arises, did someone set all this up on purpose? That's the essence of the fine-tuning argument. One of the most powerful arguments for intelligent design in the universe, developed and defended by philosophers and scientists like Robin Collins. The starting point is astonishing. The universe is incredibly fine-tuned to allow life to exist. Fundamental physical constants, such as the strength of gravity, the cosmological constant, the electron's charge, and the strong nuclear force, all have exact, precise values. If any one of these were off by even a tiny fraction, say 1 part in 10 to the 60th power, that's a 1 followed by 60 zeros, the universe would either collapse or be completely inhospitable to life. For example, if gravity were just a little weaker, galaxies and stars would never form. If it were a little stronger, the universe would have collapsed back in on itself after the Big Bang. If the strong nuclear force were even slightly different, protons and neutrons couldn't bond, and complex atoms, like carbon, essential for life, wouldn't exist. Robin Collins sums it up perfectly. The universe appears to be fine-tuned as if someone had calibrated it with the specific goal of allowing intelligent life to exist. 3 possibilities: chance, necessity, or design. Given this remarkable precision, there are 3 main explanations. Physical necessity. The universe had to be this way. It couldn't have been otherwise. Chance. The values are random, and by an incredible stroke of luck, they happen to allow life. Intelligent design. A rational mind intentionally fine-tuned the universe for life. Let's look at each of these. Some argue that perhaps the universe had no alternative, that the laws of physics could only take these values. But so far, no theory supports that. In fact, current physics suggests the opposite, that the constants could have been many different values. They seem arbitrary, as if the numbers were simply set that way without any deeper reason, without a physical or logical necessity forcing these constants to be what they are. That explanation loses strength. The universe could have been different, but it isn't, and that calls for an explanation. The second option is chance, that everything just happened randomly. Some appeal to the multiverse hypothesis. Maybe there are countless universes, each with different laws and constants, and we just happen to live in the one where life works. But this idea has major issues. First, there's no empirical evidence for any other universes. It's pure speculation. Second, as Collins points out, even if the multiverse existed, the fact that our universe is so precisely calibrated would still need explaining. If the odds are so astronomically low that they would require infinite tries to succeed once, that doesn't eliminate the need for an organizing principle. It just pushes the question back a step. It's like saying, someone won the cosmic lottery, but never explaining who bought the ticket or why the lottery existed in the first place. That's why the third option, intelligent design, carries more weight. The case for design. According to Robin Collins, the design explanation isn't only reasonable, it fits the evidence best. In every other area of experience, when we see a system that's complex, interdependent, and precisely ordered for a purpose, we naturally conclude there's a designer, a telescope, a satellite, a computer. Each is finely tuned to function with accuracy. So if the entire universe, infinitely more complex, is calibrated to allow for conscious life, it's not irrational to wonder if it too was designed. And there's more. The universe doesn't just allow for biological life, it allows for intelligent life, beings capable of understanding the very laws of the universe. Einstein marveled at this mystery. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. This deepens the argument. It's not enough that the universe is habitable, it's also intelligible. That makes the fine-tuning even more remarkable. What kind of mind could design a universe? If we accept that the universe was fine-tuned by a mind, that mind must have certain qualities. Immaterial, because it caused the physical universe itself. Timeless, because time began with the Big Bang. Powerful, capable of creating all of reality. Intelligent, able to calibrate the laws of physics with perfect precision. That description aligns closely with what we traditionally call God. A rational, transcendent, intentional creator, a universe made for life. The fine-tuning argument doesn't force belief. It invites contemplation. It suggests the universe isn't a random accident, but a place made with precision to sustain life. And if that's true, then existence isn't meaningless. It's intentional. We, conscious beings capable of wonder and understanding, aren't just statistical flukes. We're part of something designed, part of a greater purpose. The universe is comprehensible because it was created by a comprehending mind. Robin Collins. The idea that someone could rise from the dead might sound, at first, too absurd to be taken seriously in a philosophical discussion. Yet over the past few decades, a growing number of scholars and philosophers have begun treating the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth not merely as a religious belief, but as a historical event that can be examined using reason and evidence. One of the most prominent voices in this field is William Lane Craig, a Christian philosopher who presents what he calls the argument from the history of the resurrection. According to Craig, when we evaluate the historical data with intellectual honesty, the hypothesis that God intervened in history and raised Jesus from the dead emerges as the best explanation for the facts. Craig builds his argument around three well-supported historical facts, accepted by many scholars, including non-Christian ones: Jesus' burial and the empty tomb, post-mortem appearances. The origin of the early Christian belief in the resurrection. These 3 points are widely recognized within historical research on Jesus, and any serious explanation must account for them coherently. 1. The empty tomb. The New Testament reports that after the crucifixion, Jesus' body was placed in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea, and on the following Sunday, the tomb was found empty by a group of women. Craig and other scholars argue there are strong reasons to take this seriously. The tomb was publicly known, meaning the authorities could have easily disproved the claim if it were false. The first witnesses were women, which would have been unlikely to invent in that cultural context, since women's testimony had low legal value in first-century Judaism. Jesus' enemies never produced a body. Instead, they claimed the disciples stole it, which ironically assumes the tomb was empty. 2. The post-mortem appearances. Multiple ancient sources record that different people saw Jesus alive after his death. These appearances weren't just private visions or emotional experiences. They included individual encounters, Peter, James, Paul, group encounters, the 12 apostles, and more than 500 people at once. Appearances in different places and circumstances. Craig points out that even Paul, who originally persecuted Christians, claimed to have seen the risen Christ. This is significant because Paul wrote his letters just 15 to 25 years after Jesus' death, a very short time in historical terms. 3. The origin of the early Christian faith. After Jesus' death, his disciples were defeated, afraid, and in hiding. They didn't expect the Messiah to die, much less rise again in the middle of history. According to Jewish belief, the resurrection was supposed to happen only at the end of time, not as a one-time event. And yet, something happened that transformed these discouraged followers into bold preachers. They began proclaiming publicly that Jesus had risen from the dead, even under threat of persecution and death. The most plausible explanation, Craig argues, is that they truly believed they had seen the risen Christ. This conviction became the driving force behind early Christianity, which spread rapidly across the Roman Empire despite having no political power, wealth, or military strength. Considering the alternatives, Craig analyzes several naturalistic explanations that attempt to explain these three facts without invoking a miracle. The body was stolen, but by whom? The disciples lacked both the motive and the courage, and it's highly unlikely they would die for something they knew was a lie. Mass hallucinations. Psychologically improbable. Hallucinations are private, subjective events. There's no evidence of group hallucinations that align so consistently and transform entire communities. Jesus didn't really die, known as the swoon theory. But this ignores the brutality of Roman crucifixion. It's implausible that a man barely alive could convince others he had conquered death. According to Craig, none of these explanations adequately explain all three facts together. The best explanation of the historical facts concerning the death of Jesus is that God raised him from the dead. William Lane Craig. A miracle in history? The idea of God intervening in history still faces skepticism, but Craig argues there's nothing illogical about it, as long as one accepts that God's existence is possible. If God exists, then the resurrection of Jesus isn't impossible, it's entirely plausible. Moreover, the resurrection isn't a random violation of natural law. It's the confirmation of a greater purpose, God revealing himself through Jesus. Craig doesn't claim the resurrection can be proven with absolute mathematical certainty. Instead, he argues that, based on the historical evidence, belief in the resurrection is intellectually reasonable. In that sense, Christian faith isn't a blind leap into the dark. It's a rational response to an event that's historically grounded, deeply transformative, and philosophically consistent with the belief in a personal, active God. What does this mean for us? If the resurrection truly happened, then Jesus isn't just another religious leader. He is the living revelation of God, and his message carries eternal implications. It means death isn't the end. It means life has meaning. It means the universe isn't a cosmic accident, but a story with a purpose. Have you ever wondered why the universe seems so intelligently organized? Why the laws of physics are stable, elegant, and understandable? Or why there's harmony in the proportions of nature, in the orbits of the planets, and even in the smallest structures of matter? That sense of awe before the deep order of the cosmos has followed humanity since the beginning. But some philosophers went further. They said, this order cannot be the result of mere chance. It points to something greater, to a mind that orders, unifies, and sustains all things. This is the foundation of the argument from the unity and order of the universe, defended from Pythagoras in ancient Greece to Leibniz in the modern era. It's the idea that the mathematical structure and coherence of the cosmos reflect a supreme intelligence, what many call God. Pythagoras, the harmony of the cosmos. In the 6th century BC, Pythagoras of Samos declared that everything is number. He wasn't talking about mathematics as a school subject, but about something deeper, the belief that the entire cosmos is structured by mathematical relationships. For Pythagoras, the universe was like a cosmic symphony, a set of proportions, symmetries, and rhythms forming an invisible harmony. He believed that the orbits of planets, celestial motions, and even natural phenomena followed perfect mathematical ratios, like the notes of a musical scale. That vision gave rise to the very concept of cosmos, a Greek word meaning order. The world wasn't chaos, but a beautiful, intelligible, unified system. And for Pythagoras, such order could only come from an ordering mind. Centuries later, science confirmed what ancient philosophers had only intuited. The universe can indeed be described by mathematical equations. Newton's law of gravity, Maxwell's equations, Einstein's relativity, all reveal a world that is deeply rational. It's as if the universe were written in mathematical language, and our minds are capable of reading it. That alone is extraordinary. As physicist Paul Dirac once said, "It is more important that an equation be beautiful than that it be correct." Mathematical beauty became a measure of truth in science. But why? Why isn't the universe chaotic or meaningless? Why does it have order, unity, and harmony? Leibniz, the reason for order. This is where Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz enters. In the 17th century, he formulated a fundamental philosophical principle. Nothing happens without a sufficient reason. In other words, for everything that exists, there must be a reason. A rational explanation for why it exists and why it is the way it is. The universe, then, is like a grand rational system. Nothing in it is arbitrary. But Leibniz asked the deeper question: what is the sufficient reason for the universe's order? Why is the cosmos coherent, rational, and beautiful, instead of being just a meaningless collection of events? His answer was clear. There must be a mind that chose among all possible worlds the one with the greatest order, beauty, and intelligibility. That mind is God, the best of all possible worlds. Leibniz became famous and sometimes mocked by Voltaire for claiming that God created the best of all possible worlds. But that idea is often misunderstood. He didn't mean our world is perfect or free from suffering. He meant that among all rational possibilities, this universe strikes the best possible balance, the greatest harmony, diversity, and rational structure with the least metaphysical cost. In other words, this is the most balanced world between complexity and harmony, the one that a supreme intelligence would rationally choose to make real. Does order require a mind? At the heart of this argument is the insight that order never comes from chaos by itself. Whenever we see something functional, coherent, and unified, we naturally infer intelligent design. A watch implies a watchmaker. A poem implies a poet. A computer program implies a programmer. So why wouldn't a cosmos, a perfectly ordered whole, imply a cosmic mind? Pythagoras saw it as harmony. Leibniz saw it as reason. Einstein saw it as wonder. All recognized that the universe didn't need to be understandable. And yet it is. Naturalists often respond that the order of the universe can be explained by the laws of physics themselves. But that only shifts the question: why these laws? Why rational mathematical laws instead of chaos? Science can describe how things work, but it cannot explain why there is such deep logical structure in the first place, or why the human mind is able to grasp it. This harmony between mind and reality, between human reason and cosmic order, is astonishing. And many philosophers and scientists argue that it makes far more sense if there is a mind behind it all. The music of the cosmos. Ultimately, the argument from the unity and order of the universe claims that the rationality of the world points to a rationality beyond the world. The beauty, symmetry, and coherence of natural laws suggest intention, not accident. The music of the spheres is not a metaphor, it's a description of reality. Paraphrasing Pythagoras. In this sense, the cosmos isn't just something that exists. It's a message, a living work of art, revealing the presence of a mind that both sustains and understands it completely. That mind is what we call God. What makes life worth living? What keeps us going when everything around us falls apart? Why do human beings keep searching for meaning, even in the face of pain, injustice, and death? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're silent cries of the soul. The search for meaning is as essential to human life as food or air. We can survive without certainty, but not without meaning. From this deep hunger arises what we call the argument from the need for meaning. The idea that humanity's universal longing for purpose and direction points to a reality beyond the visible world. It's a yearning so radical that it can only be satisfied by something or someone beyond the human, beyond time, beyond chance. Viktor Frankl. Finding meaning in suffering. During World War II, Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl was imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps. He lost his family, his home, and his freedom. He witnessed the complete dehumanization of men and women reduced to mere survival. But in that darkness, Frankl discovered something profound. Those who found meaning in their suffering were the ones most likely to endure and survive. This insight became the foundation of logotherapy, the therapy of meaning. Frankl believed that the need to find meaning is not secondary. It is the primary motivation of human existence. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Viktor Frankl, quoting Nietzsche in Man's Search for Meaning. But where does this why come from? Why do we need it so badly? Frankl observed that a human being can be deprived of everything except one thing, the inner freedom to assign meaning to what happens. Even when all external circumstances are beyond control, the human soul insists on finding a reason to keep going. This longing for meaning doesn't seem to be a mere social or psychological construct. It crosses cultures, centuries, and situations. It doesn't fade with progress or material comfort. In fact, the more comfort and distraction we have, the more existential emptiness seems to grow. It's as if we're connected from within to a source of meaning that the world can't fully provide. That's why Frankl, even as a non-theological thinker, acknowledged the spiritual dimension of the human being. Kierkegaard, the despair of a meaningless life. Long before Frankl, Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard diagnosed the same issue. The human condition is a constant tension between the finite and the infinite. For Kierkegaard, the greatest suffering isn't physical or emotional. It's the despair of not knowing why you live. He called this despair the sickness unto death, a spiritual disease that arises when we lose contact with our deepest truth. The greatest danger is not that a man might die, but that he might go on living without ever discovering the reason for his existence. Kierkegaard, the sickness unto death. According to him, there is only one way out of this despair, a relationship with the transcendent. Human beings, he said, are selves that can only be whole when they surrender to the absolute, that is, to God. Why the world isn't enough. Throughout history, people have tried to fill the hunger for meaning with substitutes: success, pleasure, ideology, art, consumerism, romantic love. And while all of these have value, none of them can sustain the soul when pain comes, when death approaches, or when emptiness finally catches up. Frankl saw this clearly in the camps. Those who found meaning only in possessions or people collapsed when those things were taken away. But those who placed their meaning in something transcendent, even if not defined religiously, found strength. That distinction is crucial, because as this argument reminds us, if the meaning of life cannot rest on anything temporary, then it must rest on something eternal. Just as thirst implies the existence of water, and hunger implies food, the longing for meaning suggests that meaning truly exists, somewhere. The argument from the need for meaning proposes that this deep desire is not a psychological glitch, but an inner compass, and that compass points towards something, or someone, capable of giving life a purpose that even death cannot erase. Against nihilism. The main rival of this argument is nihilism, the idea that life has no objective meaning, purpose, or value. For nihilists, everything is the product of chance, and any attempt to find meaning is a necessary illusion. But Frankl responded firmly, life has meaning under all circumstances, even the most miserable ones. Man's greatest freedom is the ability to find that meaning. Kierkegaard would add that nihilism is simply the purest form of despair, the modern person's attempt to escape the truth of their own soul through distraction. But distraction doesn't solve the problem. It only delays the confrontation. The deepest question. In the end, this argument isn't just philosophical, it's existential. It doesn't only ask, does God exist? It asks, can you truly live without something or someone that transcends this world? And if you can't, then maybe that longing for meaning is the strongest evidence that God isn't just an idea, but a presence the soul recognizes long before it's ever taught to believe. Imagine waking up one day and feeling that everything around you has lost its meaning. Your achievements don't matter, your relationships feel fragile, and time just slips away without purpose. That feeling, that life is empty of meaning, is what we call nihilism. Nihilism claims that existence has no value, no purpose, and no inherent meaning. That everything we believe in, good and evil, right and wrong, love and truth, are just human inventions, temporary illusions meant to keep chaos at bay for a little while. But here's the paradox. Even when many claim that life is meaningless, we continue to act as if it does have meaning. We still seek justice, truth, and beauty. We want to be loved. We want to leave a legacy. And this reveals something profound. The human soul resists nihilism. That's where the existential argument against nihilism begins. The death of God and the collapse of meaning. The word nihilism comes from the Latin nihil, meaning nothing. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche described most clearly the impact of what he called the death of God on Western civilization. For Nietzsche, when society abandons belief in God, it loses the foundation for objective value and purpose. God is dead, and we have killed him. Nietzsche, the gay science. Nietzsche didn't celebrate this as a victory. He saw it as a deep civilizational crisis. If God does not exist, then, as Dostoevsky would later say, everything is permitted, and that's not liberation, but an abyss. Kierkegaard, the despair of a godless soul. For Søren Kierkegaard, the father of Christian existentialism, the absence of God isn't freedom, it's despair. He described the human being as a paradox, a synthesis of the finite and the infinite, body and spirit, reason and faith. That balance can only hold when anchored in the eternal, in God. When that foundation is removed, a person falls into existential despair, even if they don't realize it. They chase distractions, success, pleasure, status, to avoid confronting the void within. Kierkegaard called this the hidden despair, being lost and not even knowing it. Despair is the sickness unto death. Kierkegaard, the sickness unto death. But here's the revealing part. Even in the absence of God, we keep searching for meaning. It's as if there's a compass inside us still pointing towards something greater, even when we try to ignore the map. Dostoevsky, the moral consequences of nihilism. If Kierkegaard was the philosopher of anxiety, Fyodor Dostoevsky was the novelist of the struggling soul. In his works, especially The Brothers Karamazov, he explored the devastating consequences of moral and spiritual nihilism. In the famous dialogue between Ivan and Alyosha, Ivan questions God's justice in light of innocent suffering and concludes that without God, there can be no foundation for goodness. And yet, Ivan himself can't live consistently with that idea. He suffers, loves, and feels guilt. In other words, he lives as if moral truths still exist, even while denying their source. That's the existential contradiction Dostoevsky exposes. If God does not exist, everything is permitted, but no one truly lives as if everything were permitted. The human refusal to accept total absurdity, our instinct to seek meaning and justice even in tragedy, is a sign that we belong to something beyond absurdity. Frankl, meaning as the antidote. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz and founder of logotherapy, brought this debate to a deeply human level. In Man's Search for Meaning, he describes how, even in the most extreme conditions of a concentration camp, people continued to look for purpose. Frankl noticed that prisoners who could assign meaning to their suffering were far more likely to survive and to remain dignified. But if nihilism were true, that instinct would be pointless. The search for meaning would just be an illusion, a mental trick. And yet, as Frankl insisted, man is not destroyed by suffering. He is destroyed by suffering without meaning. If the longing for meaning is universal and persistent, maybe it points to something real, something transcendent that gives existence its value. Just as thirst implies the existence of water, the hunger for meaning suggests that meaning exists, perhaps found in someone beyond ourselves. The core of the argument. If life truly had no meaning, nihilism wouldn't just be possible, it would be inevitable. But in reality, human beings resist it with everything they have. We fight against the void. We seek purpose, even in pain. We create, love, believe, and refuse to accept that everything is mere accident. That refusal could be seen as stubbornness, or as an existential clue that we come from something greater. The existential argument against nihilism proposes exactly that our longing for meaning and our inability to live fully without it are evidence of God's reality. Not a mathematical proof, but a cry of the soul, an echo of something eternal within us. Kierkegaard would call it the leap of faith, not a blind leap into darkness, but a step toward the eternal. Dostoevsky would see it as the redemption of human freedom. Frankl would call it the healing of the soul through rediscovered purpose. In the end, this argument doesn't simply say God exists. It asks, can you really live as if he doesn't? Can you carry the weight of a world without meaning? If you can't, if something in you resists that idea, maybe that resistance isn't weakness, but truth. Maybe, as C.S. Lewis once said, we were made for another world. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this video made you think, moved you in some way, or opened a new perspective, hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Here, every topic is a chance to dive deeper into the meaning of life, the big questions of existence, and the ideas that shape our world. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about this topic? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going with respect and depth. If you know someone who's also searching for answers or loves philosophy, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. And before you go, stay on the channel. There are many more videos waiting for you about God, morality, freedom, purpose, and the mysteries of existence. See you in the next video.